You probably think you're in complete control of your choices, but there is a hidden author secretly drafting almost every decision you make.
Which is, yeah, I mean, that's a pretty unsettling thought to start with.
Right. Well, anyway, welcome to a brand new deep dive on Snapbook. Today we are looking at a truly monumental piece of work.
Oh, absolutely monumental.
Yeah, it's the groundbreaking book, Thinking Fast and Slow, by the Nobel Prize-winning economist Daniel Kahneman. We're going to figure out what this book is actually about and, more importantly, why it matters to how you navigate your daily life.
Because, we all walk around feeling like we are the conscious, deliberate captains of our own ships, right?
Totally. We think we're totally logical.
Right. We believe we weigh the facts and make these hyper-logical choices. But Kahneman's work exposes these two completely distinct systems that drive our minds and often without our permission.
Without us even realizing it's happening.
Exactly. And his ultimate goal with this research wasn't to write some dense academic textbook that only economists would read. He actually wanted to enrich our watercooler gossip.
I love that. Water cooler gossip about cognitive bias.
Yeah, he wanted to give you, the listener, a richer vocabulary to identify predictable errors in judgment. First, you start spotting these mental glitches in your coworkers and friends.
Which is always super entertaining, by the way.
Oh, definitely. But eventually, the real goal is to start catching them in yourself.
Okay, let's unpack this. The core concept of this book is that our brain operates using these two fictitious characters.
Right. Two totally different agents.
Yeah, Kahneman asks us to picture them sharing space in your head, and they have wildly different personalities. First, you have System 1, which is fast, intuitive, emotional, and completely automatic.
It's the part of your brain that instantly reads the anger on someone's face from across a room.
Yes. Or like when a car suddenly swerves into your lane and you just instantly flinch. You don't decide to do those things. They just happen.
It requires literally zero conscious effort.
Zero. But then you have System 2. And System 2 is slow, deliberate, logical, and just highly effortful.
It's the voice in your head that you have to actively fire up to figure out a complex math problem.
Like multiplying 17 by 24 or trying to parallel park in a really tight space. You have to focus.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this division of labor between the two systems is actually an evolutionary masterpiece. It is highly, highly efficient.
Because the brain uses so much energy, right?
Exactly. The brain consumes an enormous amount of calories, and constantly running deep logical analysis would just exhaust us before breakfast. So System 1 handles like 95% of our lives on autopilot.
Just to save energy. But there's a catch, right?
There is a big catch. System 2 is inherently lazy. Its default state is this sort of low-effort mode. It vastly prefers to just sit back and rubber stamp whatever impulses or intuitions System 1 throws its way.
Rather than doing the hard work of verifying them.
Right. And understanding this dynamic is crucial because when System 2 is tired or distracted or just being its naturally lazy self, System 1 completely takes over.
And since System 1 relies on these really quick mental shortcuts, it leads to massive predictable errors in how we navigate the real world. I like to think of System 2 almost like a home's electrical circuit breaker.
Oh, yeah. It's a good way to look at it.
You have this very strict, limited budget of conscious attention. So when the cognitive load gets too high, that breaker trips to protect the most important activity, and it just shuts down power to everything else.
Which brings up that famous invisible gorilla experiment mentioned in the sources.
Yes. I love this one. People are told to watch a video of basketball players passing a ball, and they have to carefully count the passes.
Which takes a lot of System 2 energy.
Right. It demands so much focus that a person in a full gorilla suit can literally walk into the middle of the screen, thump their chest, and walk off.
And half the viewers never even see it.
Half of them. You become literally blind to things right in front of you because System 2 has reallocated all your mental power. It just shut off the peripheral sensors.
And that physical blindness translates directly to cognitive blindness in our daily choices.
How so?
Well, System 2 believes it is the hero of the story. It thinks it's the one in charge making all the smart, rational decisions. But because of its extreme laziness, it rarely verifies the information System 1 is feeding it.
Ah, so it's a lazy controller.
Exactly. Kahneman uses this brilliant little test called the bat and ball puzzle to expose this illusion.
Oh, let's do it.
Okay, so a bat and a ball cost $1.10 in total.
Okay.
The bat cost exactly $1 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost?
I remember the first time I heard this, my brain instantly screamed 10 cents. It feels so obviously and undeniably right.
Because it's punchy and appealing.
Yeah, it's just an appealing number that pops into your head without any effort at all.
But that instant answer is pure System 1 in action. It sees the $1, it sees the 10 cents, and it splits them up based on an emotional feeling of what just looks correct.
But if you force System 2 to actually do the math,
Right, if the ball is 10 cents and the bat is $1 more, which make the bat $1.10, the total would be $1.20.
which is wrong. The real answer is that the ball costs 5 cents.
Getting to that answer requires you to actively override that powerful first impulse. You need a small amount of mental effort to hold the numbers in your head and check the logic.
And most people simply don't bother to invest that effort, do they?
No, they don't. Their System 2 takes the path of least resistance, endorses the 10-cent answer, and just moves on.
I'm struggling with something here, though. If System 2 is supposed to be our advanced logical brain, why is it so quick to just act as a rubber stamp?
It's a fair question.
It feels like a massive design flaw if our smart brain is just an apologist for our emotional brain.
Well, it comes down to something called cognitive ease. When a thought feels smooth and easy to process, System 1 flags it as true and safe.
So it just feels right.
Yeah, and when we inherently believe a conclusion is true, based on that gut feeling, we become highly likely to believe arguments that support it, even if those arguments are deeply flawed.
Wow, so System 2 isn't a judge, it's basically a lawyer.
That is perfectly said. It is a lawyer hired by System 1. Its job isn't to seek the objective truth. Its job is to find arguments that justify the emotional conclusions System 1 already reached.
It searches our memory for confirming evidence rather than actually testing the gut feeling.
Exactly.
Which means we are walking around defending opinions we never actually thought through. Like how many of your deeply held beliefs are actually just System 1 intuitions that your lazy System 2 never bothered to double check?
It's a very humbling thought.
Very. And it gets scarier because this laziness allows System 1 to do something even more dangerous, right? It constructs our entire reality based only on the information that happens to be immediately available to it.
Yeah, the acronym Kahneman uses for this is WYSIAD. What you see is all there is.
WYSIAD. I like that.
System 1 is basically a machine designed for jumping to conclusions. It excels at constructing the absolute best possible, most coherent story out of the ideas that are currently activated in your memory.
But it completely and utterly ignores the information it doesn't have.
Completely ignores it. It lacks the capacity to pause and ask, wait, what critical data am I missing right now?
Wait, I want to push back on that. If System 1 is so terrible at processing reality and constantly ignores missing facts, just to build a neat little story, how did humans survive at all?
Good point.
Shouldn't evolutionary pressure have completely weeded out a brain system that is this reckless with the truth?
Well, what's fascinating here is that evolution doesn't care about objective truth. It only cares about survival.
Okay, true.
Imagine our ancestors on the savannah. They hear a rustle in the bushes. System 1 immediately takes the limited data, the sound, and jumps to the conclusion, tiger.
And then the human runs away.
Exactly. Now, maybe it was just the wind, but the human who pauses to engage System 2 and carefully gathers more data to determine if they're missing any key facts,
They get eaten.
they get eaten. Speed was prioritized over thoroughness. The problem is that we now use that exact same rustling bush survival mechanism to make complex financial, medical, and political decisions.
Ah, so the mechanism that kept us alive in the wild makes us incredibly overconfident in the modern boardroom.
Precisely. Because we only have two pieces of information, but they fit together into a nice, neat narrative. So System 1 makes us feel completely certain in our judgment.
We systematically fail to allow for the unknown unknowns. We just take what we see, build a story, lock it in, and feel brilliant about it.
We really do.
Are you making high-stakes decisions right now based on a beautifully coherent story that is actually missing half the facts? You wouldn't even know because System 1 won't let you feel the doubt.
And this naturally raises an important question. If System 1 is so prone to jumping to conclusions with limited data, how does it handle truly impossible, highly complex questions where building a simple story isn't an option?
The ones that actually require deep statistical analysis.
Right. It uses a mental sleight of hand called substitution.
Right, because System 1 is never stumped. It hates a vacuum. It always has an answer ready to go.
Always. So when you are faced with a difficult target question, for example, Kahneman uses the question, Should I invest millions of dollars in Ford Motor Company?
Which requires analyzing stock valuations, market trends, supply chains.
Yeah, that is an extremely high cognitive load. So System 1 seamlessly and unconsciously substitutes it with an easier related question.
Instead of analyzing the valuation, it asks, do I like Ford cars?
Exactly. Do I like Ford cars? It's so much easier.
And the craziest part is that this substitution happens completely automatically without any bells or whistles going off in our head.
We instantly generate an answer to the easy question. We feel highly confident about it, and our lazy System 2 just signs the paperwork.
We never even realized that we didn't actually answer the original complex question. I see this happen all the time in everyday scenarios, too.
Oh yeah, it's everywhere.
Think about interviewing a candidate for a job. The complex question is, will this person's technical skills and work ethic drive long-term value for this specific role? That's exhausting to figure out.
Very exhausting.
So System 1 substitutes it with, did this person smile at me and make good small talk in the first 3 minutes? We answer the second question, hire them and walk around feeling like incredible judges of character.
Yeah, the next time you make a complex assessment, you have to ask yourself, are you answering the question at hand, or did your brain just substitute an easier one?
That is such a good filter to apply. So we've seen how System 1 substitutes logic for easy emotional answers. But what happens when there is actual tangible risk on the line? Like when money or status is involved?
Well, it turns out System 1 has a massive built-in panic button when it comes to losing things.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Kahneman and his research partner, Amos Tversky, developed prospect theory, which mapped out how we evaluate risk.
And the core finding is that organisms naturally treat threats as far more urgent than opportunities.
Again, we look to the evolutionary logic, right?
Yep. An organism that misses out on a feeding opportunity might be hungry for a day. An organism that ignores a threat is dead.
Wow, yeah, that makes sense.
So the asymmetry in how we process gains and losses is deeply wired into our nervous system. Because of this, losses loom roughly twice as large in our minds as gains.
Psychologically, the pain you feel from dropping a $100 bill on the street is far more intense than the joy you feel from finding $150.
Exactly. The mathematics of the money might be similar, but the emotional weights are completely unbalanced. And this leads directly to a phenomenon known as the endowment effect.
The coffee mug experiment. We have to talk about this because it perfectly illustrates how weird our brains get about ownership.
Yeah, so the researchers took a room full of students and randomly gave half of them a simple university-branded coffee mug. The other half received nothing.
Okay.
Then they essentially opened a market to see at what price the new owners would sell the mug and the buyers would buy it. Now, these mugs were identical, and the groups were randomly assigned.
So pure logic dictates that the average price buyers were willing to pay should closely match the average price sellers were willing to accept.
But that's not what happened at all.
Because the moment that mug was placed in someone's hand, their psychological reference point shifted. It became their mug.
And giving up that mug suddenly registered to System 1 not as a transaction, but as a loss.
Because the pain of losing something hurts twice as much as the pleasure of gaining it?
Right, so the sellers demanded roughly twice as much money to part with the mug as the buyers were willing to pay to acquire it. The mere illusion of ownership, even for just a few minutes, fundamentally altered their valuation of a completely mundane object.
Let's bring back the circuit breaker analogy here. When a seller is asked to give up the mug, the emotional load of that perceived loss spikes so fast that the circuit breaker trips.
And System 2, the logical brain that should be saying, it's just a $3 mug, sell it for $4, gets shut down.
System 1 takes over screaming, don't let them take our stuff unless they pay us double. So why does this matter to us outside of college experiments?
Well, loss aversion causes us to fiercely and often irrationally defend the status quo in our lives. It is the invisible force that makes negotiations so incredibly difficult.
Because any concession you offer feels like a painful loss, even if you are getting something equally valuable in return.
It keeps people paralyzed in bad jobs, holding on to failing investments and staying in unhealthy relationships, all because the pain of losing what they currently have, no matter how bad it is, outweighs the potential joy of a better future.
What opportunities are you missing out on right now simply because you are terrified of a short-term loss? It's a huge blind spot.
It really is.
And since we are so deeply terrified of losses, that means the mere words someone uses to describe a situation can completely hijack our choices. This leads us into the incredible power of emotional framing.
Framing is the concept that our choices are heavily sometimes entirely dictated by how information is presented to us rather than the information itself.
In the sources, there's this jaw-dropping medical trial. They went to physicians, highly trained, scientifically minded doctors, and gave them the statistical outcomes for a specific lung cancer surgery.
Yeah.
Half the doctors were given the data framed as a 90% short-term survival rate. The other half were given the exact same data, but it was framed as a 10% short-term mortality rate. When the doctors heard the word survival, they highly favored recommending the surgery. When they heard the word mortality, they rejected it. It's the exact same mathematical outcome.
Which absolutely shatters the traditional economic theory that humans are rational actors. In economics, there's a theoretical being called an econ, a perfectly rational agent who maximizes utility.
But we aren't econs.
Exactly. An econ would see 90% survival and 10% mortality as mathematically identical and make the exact same choice every time. But humans do not. Our preferences are not reality-bound, they are frame-bound.
Because the word mortality instantly triggers System 1's loss aversion. It generates a wave of fear.
And because System 2 is lazy and slow, it fails to step in, do the math, and realize that the other frame means the exact same thing. We are completely at the mercy of the words used to present options to us.
This leaves us incredibly vulnerable to how marketers, politicians, and even our own doctors frame information. If you change the frame of the problem you are currently facing, does your seemingly ironclad decision suddenly reverse? If you force yourself to reframe a financial cost as an investment in your skills, or maybe a painful failure as a necessary lesson, does it change what you do next?
It's wild how easily our entire perspective can be flipped by swapping out a single word. It really forces us to realize how fragile our convictions really are.
Totally fragile.
And if System 1 hijacking our present moment with emotional frames wasn't enough, we also have to look at how it distorts our past.
Oh man, this part.
Yeah, System 1 doesn't just dictate what is happening right now, it actively rewrites our memories of what already happened.
This blew my mind. Kahneman breaks our identity down into two competing selves. You have the experiencing self who actually lives in the present moment, feeling the pain, the joy, or the boredom second by second.
Right.
And then you have the remembering self, the one who keeps score and writes the history books after the event is over. There is this fascinating kind of brutal experiment in the sources called the cold hand experiment that shows how these two selves are constantly at war.
It is a profound demonstration of the conflict.
Well,
So participants were asked to hold their hand in painfully cold water.
okay.
In the first trial, they held it there for 60 seconds of sharp, consistent pain and then took it out to warm up.
Sounds awful.
Right. Then in the second trial, they held their hand in the freezing water for the exact same 60 seconds. But then the researchers secretly flowed in slightly warmer water for an additional 30 seconds.
So to be clear, it was still uncomfortable and painful, just slightly less painful at the very end.
Exactly. The total duration of the second trial was 90 seconds of pain versus 60 seconds in the first.
Here's where the brain glitch happens. When asked which trial they would rather repeat, a significant majority of people actually chose the 90-second one.
They actively volunteered for more total pain.
I was reading this thinking, how is that remotely possible? Why would anyone choose to suffer longer? Because to the remembering self, the end of the experience was slightly less painful, and that's all that mattered.
Because the remembering self doesn't keep a minute-by-minute ledger. It uses heuristics. This reveals the two cardinal rules of how we form memories. First, the peak-end rule.
Which means we primarily remember the most intense moment of an experience, the peak and how it ended.
Yes. The rest is mostly discarded. Second is duration neglect. We completely ignore how long the experience actually lasted.
Like a 2-week vacation with a terrible final day will be remembered as a terrible vacation.
Completely erasing the 13 days of joy the experiencing self had. The remembering self is effectively a tyrant. It makes all of our future choices based on these deeply flawed, abbreviated memories, and in doing so, it constantly condemns the poor experiencing self to unnecessary pain.
So are you making choices to maximize your actual daily experience, or are you just trying to curate a good memory? Are you suffering through a miserable, stressful 2-week backpacking trip just so you have a few good photos and a story for the remembering self to tell at parties?
It's a deep existential conflict between who we are in the moment and who we are when we look back. It requires a profound shift in how you evaluate your own happiness and the choices you make to achieve it.
Okay, we have covered a massive amount of cognitive ground today. We've got lazy circuit breakers, WYSIAD, and the danger of jumping to conclusions, answering the wrong questions through substitution, the panic of loss aversion, the manipulation of emotional framing, and tyrant memories dictating our future.
That is quite the list.
It is. So what does this all mean for you this week? It is time for our snap action. How do we actually take Kahneman's work and use it to make better choices?
The most realistic, immediately applicable action you can take this week is to practice a technique Kahneman calls broad framing to overcome your natural paralyzing loss aversion.
Broad framing.
The next time you face a small risk with a statistically positive expected outcome, maybe it's volunteering to lead a tough project at work, making a minor career leap, or a small financial investment, do not look at that decision in isolation.
Right, because if you look at it in isolation as a single pass or fail event, System 1 will just scream, "What if I lose?"
Exactly.
The circuit breaker will trip, the fear of the loss will double the value of the status quo, and you'll just freeze up and do nothing.
Exactly the trap you want to avoid. Instead, you need to think like a trader. Remind yourself of a very simple, very rational mantra. You win a few, you lose a few.
You win a few, you lose a few.
By actively viewing this single risk as just one tiny part of a whole portfolio of decisions you're going to make over the course of your life, you force System 2 to wake up and do the math.
Zooming out blunts the emotional sting of System 1's fear of losing.
It allows you to realize that taking calculated risks over the long term is a winning strategy, even if this specific one doesn't pan out.
I love that mental shift. Zoom out. Look at the whole portfolio of your life. Don't let the irrational fear of losing one metaphorical coffee mug stop you from playing the game entirely.
And I'd like to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over regarding these biases. We focused heavily on individual decision-making today,
Right.
but organizations are just collections of individuals, which means corporate cultures often amplify these exact errors. However, because organizations naturally move and think slower than individuals, they actually have a unique power to combat WYSIAD and overconfidence.
Yeah.
They can institute a process called a premortem.
By premortem.
Yeah, before making a massive high-stakes decision, you gather the entire team, imagine you were a year in the future, and pretend the decision was a complete unmitigated disaster.
Oh, wow.
Then you force everyone to write a brief history of exactly how and why it failed. It forces that lazy System 2 to actively hunt for the unknown unknowns before the damage is actually done.
That is so smart.
Think about your own life. How differently would your trajectory look if you ran a premortem on your biggest choices before you made them?
That is such a powerful tool. The X-ray machine for our decisions might be murky, but tools like broad framing and the premortem help us start seeing the fractures before they shatter our plans. Thank you so much for tuning in to this deep dive into the source material. We always want to know what you want us to unpack next, so please suggest which book you want covered on the next deep dive.
We look forward to exploring it with you.
Until next time, snap in, level up.